For decades, a quiet but fierce battle has been shaping the price of your home, the jobs in your town, and the trade relationship between two of the world's closest neighbors. The US-Canada softwood lumber dispute isn't just about wood. It's about politics, economics, and the hidden forces that decide how much you pay for the place you live. Today, we're breaking down the history, the controversy, and what it means for both countries in 2025. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update on the world's biggest trade battles and how they impact your daily life. Trust me, you're going to want to be here when we cover the twists and turns in this story. Softwood lumber dispute between the United States and Canada is one of the longest-running trade tensions in North America, stretching back decades. Softwood lumber refers to wood from coniferous trees like pine, spruce, and fir, which is widely used in home construction, furniture, and other building materials. Canada, with its vast forest resources, is a major exporter of softwood lumber to the US. The root of the dispute lies in the fact that US lumber producers argue that Canadian lumber is unfairly cheap because provincial governments in Canada, which own most of the timberlands, charge very low stumpage fees the price to harvest timber. This, according to US producers, amounts to a government subsidy, lowering Canadian producers' costs and allowing them to sell lumber in the US market at prices American producers cannot match. The US has also accused Canadian producers of dumping selling products in the American market at below their cost of production to gain market share. In response, the US has repeatedly imposed duties and tariffs on Canadian lumber imports. Canada, on the other hand, argues that its forestry system is different, that the fees reflect the long-term management of public forests, and that the US claims are politically motivated to protect American lumber producers from competition rather than based on genuine unfair practices. Dispute has flared up in multiple waves, often referred to as softwood lumber dispute, and subsequent challenges by Canada through trade dispute settlement bodies like the World Trade Organization (WTO) and the North American Free Trade Agreement (NAFTA) panels. Occasionally, both countries have reached negotiated settlements. For example, the 2006 Softwood Lumber Agreement (SLA) created a framework under which Canada agreed to limit exports and/or pay export taxes when lumber prices fell below a certain threshold. This agreement lasted for about a decade but expired in 2015. Since then, there has been no new long-term deal, and tariffs have once again become the norm. Every few years, the level of duties changes depending on the US Department of Commerce's review of the situation. These reviews sometimes lower duties, but at other times, they increase them depending on US findings about subsidies and dumping margins. The current 2025 situation in the latest phase of the dispute, the US Department of Commerce has decided to increase the combined countervailing and anti-dumping duty rates on Canadian softwood lumber imports. This follows reviews where American officials concluded that Canadian producers are still benefiting from what they see as unfair government subsidies and selling lumber at unfairly low prices. From Canada's perspective, these duties are unwarranted and hurt both countries' economies. Canadian officials and industry leaders argue that the duties raise construction costs in the US, especially at a time when affordable housing is already a major concern. They point out that US home builders rely heavily on Canadian lumber to meet demand, and limiting supply through tariffs leads to higher prices for American consumers and builders alike. Dispute affects a wide range of economic actors in both countries. For Canadian producers, higher US duties cut into profit margins, reduce competitiveness, and sometimes force mills to close or lay off workers, especially in rural areas where lumber production is a major employer. The uncertainty over future trade terms also makes it harder for companies to plan long-term investments. For American lumber producers, tariffs offer some protection from Canadian competition, potentially allowing them to raise their prices and expand production. However, the American lumber industry cannot fully meet domestic demand, meaning that imports are still essential. For US home builders and consumers, tariffs generally mean higher construction costs, When lumber prices rise, the cost of building new homes increases, which can worsen the housing affordability crisis. In the past, spikes in lumber prices have been linked to noticeable increases in home prices, especially in fast-growing regions. Softwood lumber dispute is not purely about economics, it's also about political pressures in both countries. In the US, domestic lumber producers have strong lobbying groups that push for protective tariffs. They argue that without tariffs, Canadian imports will continue to undermine US jobs in the forestry sector. Politicians, especially those from timber-producing states, often support these measures to protect local employment in Canada. The lumber industry is a politically sensitive sector, particularly in provinces like British Columbia, Quebec, and Ontario. Canadian politicians, both at the provincial and federal levels, are under pressure to defend the industry against what they see as unfair trade restrictions. The dispute also taps into broader Canadian concerns about economic dependence on the US and the need to defend national interests in trade. Canada has repeatedly challenged US duties at the WTO and under the dispute resolution provisions of NAFTA and now the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, or CUSMA. The US and Canada have one of the largest and most integrated trading relationships in the world, one of many commodities that cross the border daily, but the intensity of the softwood lumber dispute has sometimes strained the broader trade relationship. Even so, both countries have a mutual interest in keeping trade flowing. Lumber demand in the US is expected to remain strong due to population growth, urban development, and the ongoing need for housing. Canada, meanwhile, benefits greatly from access to the massive US market. The lack of a permanent agreement creates uncertainty not only for the lumber industry, but also for other sectors, as it sets a precedent for how disputes might be handled in the future. Possible paths forward. Experts and industry stakeholders have suggested several ways the dispute could be resolved or at least stabilized. A new softwood lumber agreement, similar to the 2006 SLA, a new long-term deal could set clear rules for trade, export limits, and pricing thresholds. Some have suggested that Canada adjust its stumpage fees to be more market-driven, reducing US claims of unfair subsidies. However, this is politically sensitive in Canada. Greater cooperation on housing and supply chains, recognizing the shared interest in affordable housing. Both countries could work together to ensure steady lumber supply without excessive price volatility, legal and institutional reform, strengthening trade dispute resolution mechanisms under CUSMA or the WTO could make rulings more binding and reduce the length of disputes. The US-Canada softwood lumber dispute is more than a trade disagreement. It's a tug-of-war over market share, national pride, and the price of something we all need. While governments argue and industries fight for their piece of the market, everyday people, from mill workers in British Columbia to first-time homebuyers in Florida, feel the real impact. Whether a lasting agreement is possible remains uncertain, but one thing is clear: the outcome will shape the future of housing and cross-border trade for years to come. If you found this breakdown useful, drop a comment below with your thoughts. Do you think these two countries will ever reach a permanent deal, or is this fight here to stay? And don't go anywhere. In our next video, we're diving into another cross-border trade battle that's quietly driving up your grocery bill. You won't want to miss it, so click here to watch that now.